welcome, ladies. Excited to be here with you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. We're here to talk about the future of luxury today and what we've learned together with Ipsos and Dotdash Meredith. I'm Lindsay Franke. I'm a president at Ipsos, running our strategic development and creative and innovation upstream in North America. And I'll let both of my guests introduce themselves here today as well.
Thanks so much, Lindsay. I'm Whitney Krause, a president at Ipsos as well. Our teams are more so focused on brand and experience, so a little bit more downstream. And thinking more about how customers and users experience the brands after they've been, positioned in the market.
Great. And I'm Leah Wyar. I'm the president of the beauty and style and entertainment brands at Dotdash Meredith. So that's People, Entertainment Weekly, InStyle, Birdie, Brides.
Great. Well, happy to have you guys
Yeah,
here
thanks
to
so much.
have this fun
Definitely.
discussion. Probably one of my favorite topics to talk about luxury.
I know, really jumped at this one.
I couldn't be having more fun, and we couldn't be in a more luxurious place to be talking
Very
about
true.
this with Can. But certainly some of the things we're seeing in terms of the evolving market and what we've learned together and what's important for brands to be thinking about in the ad space as they talk about emerging luxury. And so, one of the things that has come out of, the research that we've done together and we really want to understand a little better is people have different definitions of luxury, right? And so, obviously from generational to different groups of individuals, how are people looking at luxury now, Whitney?
Yeah, so there's two things that I want to highlight, and one of the things that we were intentionally doing within the research was really looking at how we need to sort of expand the actual definition and how people are looking at luxury. So first, let's think about it from a category perspective. So there's obviously some obvious ones, style, thinking about jewelry, clothing, that sort of thing, travel. But we really wanted to run the gamut, and so we're thinking also about food and wine. We're thinking about your home and what you put in your home, lifestyle and entertainment, things that you do outside of the home, auto, space, and then something that you'll hear highlighted a little bit here because it's some interesting findings is also thinking about finance and financial management as part of the luxury space as well. So that's how we're thinking about it from a category perspective. But I also do want to highlight that we really looked a lot into how consumers feel about luxury, and that's playing a role in how we're defining it. Most fun stat I think of the piece is that 70% of people say that luxury can be found in everyday essentials, and it's something that they feel they have a lot more sort of access to in their ongoing day to day. And those things actually don't necessarily have a high price tag. So when you think about how people are incorporating luxury into their everyday, think about a really nice coffee maker with a really wonderful, high quality type of coffee. Think about, excellent skincare products that are both, maybe from an interesting brand, but also importantly, very effective. And you're really kind of having that exposure to different opportunities and different types of products that are in the market. So thinking about ways that people are incorporating those types of luxuries along with their everyday.
So a lot of the little luxuries,
little bits,
exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting.
All
Yeah.
about the experience.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
You just want to make little pockets of luxurious experience every day.
Yeah.
And so bringing that kind of into your many moments of life in your everyday, and that's how consumers are looking at it, regardless of if maybe historically they were in that traditional how we would define a luxury market. People are bringing in little bits in different places. So, Leah, we're seeing when we think about the transformation kind of in that way of people bringing it into little bits of their life, what are we seeing accelerate in that space?
Well, I think what's interesting too is that luxury used to be like a status symbol, like symbolic of wealth. Like it felt very just like an exclusion. There was like a club. Now it feels so much more open. There's this sort of everyone's in mentality. I think the stat was 9 out of 10 people are thinking about engaging in luxury at some point. And that to me is so interesting because it's a Gen Pop stat. It's 90% of America.
90% of America.
So that then just totally changes how they're thinking about luxury, how they're defining it. We were talking about experiences. It also is it's not a symbol of status anymore. It's like a symbol of accomplishment. It's such a nuanced way of thinking, but it's almost a reward in a way. It's not as though I'm going to buy that watch or buy that car because I've made it and I need to tell the world. It's I'm going to do that because I feel I've earned it, I've worked toward it. So it's just a slight shift, but I think it's really important.
Versus,
it's almost
status
like
symbol.
self-care a little bit. I mean, skincare plays into that too, but just think it's changing just slightly in the way that the mindset is. Like a lot of emphasis placed on value of brand, values of the brand. So sustainability is massively huge to the Gen Z audience, for example. So just little shifts.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see, because I think, even a decade ago, when you look at how that's transformed in terms of maybe more aspirational and kind of, like you said, a much more exclusive nature, but now people are bringing it into those little elements of everyday, the reward, the treat, the how can I have this little buy up luxury because I've earned it. And I think that's really interesting.
There's a piece that to me that thinks like, when you think about social media and how it is like fully democratized and brought in all of these products and experiences to the Gen Z audience, for example, they are growing up believing that like they can have that luxury anywhere, anytime, any place. It's not this like reserved on the shelf for a special moment in my life. So I think that's driving a lot of that too.
Yeah, it is interesting, because we were actually having a conversation about that a few weeks ago with another one of our clients about how the ad space has transformed even in that, because the access and the awareness to more brands has grown and expanded, even from when we were all younger, having awareness of what the luxury brands are and what the different options are.
Your point about social media too, think about like that exposure also just allows people to have more information about what's out there easier and much more quickly. So maybe it used to take a certain type of income level, a certain type of status, a certain type of like, let's say, tenure in a particular position or area to even have access to the types of luxury options that were available. And now people can save it, they can screenshot, they can catalog things, and they just that access also, I think, speeds up some of this like incorporation into everyday life and sort of some of the accessibility pieces that we've been talking about.
Yeah. So you both said there's kind of an acceleration in this. What there's specific types of consumers that we found are really driving this, that as brands and advertisers are thinking about, okay, where should I be investing, targeting? What are those brands?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to talk about two things. So from a generational perspective, one of the overarching findings that we had was just the role that the Gen Z folks are playing in this space right now. So when you think about Gen Z, as we were talking about, like there's a lot of dialogue about how to make this more accessible, how to make it sort of more incorporated into your everyday. The thing that's particular about Gen Z is they also have very high expectations of luxury brands in terms of how they make something fit for them. So thinking about personalization, thinking about individuality, like those types of themes really resonate in particular with Gen Z. And frankly, they have expectations of brands that they're able to connect with them on that more individual level. So kind of to the point you were making earlier, there's a big shift with Gen Z about like kind of stepping away from that, like keeping up with the Joneses or sort of like trying to attain some sort of like status level that somebody else has. What's going to resonate a lot more with them is that they're accessing luxury in a way that's like individual and focused on their needs and their sort of lifestyle where they are. So that's something that we want brands to be keeping in mind from a residency perspective. I will say though, even though I've been talking a little bit about Gen Z, millennials still dominate the luxury space from a generational perspective. They're just highly more engaged across all of the categories that I had mentioned earlier. And so when you think about maybe just where they are in their lives, where they are in their careers, from an income generation perspective, they really are very highly engaged. But what we're really excited about from the acceleration perspective that you mentioned is where are we seeing some of those sort of additional entrants to the market? That's why we're talking about Gen Z. And then one other thing I wanted to point out about Gen Z and kind of to the keeping up with the Joneses piece, in addition to that individuality that I mentioned, they also are highly critical of the exclusivity concept within luxury. And so when we are thinking about what types of content brands are putting out there, the Gen Z team, where they were off the charts in terms of negative reception to exclusivity and to thinking about sort of like the inaccessibility of certain brands and that only certain people could have them. So it really is changing the game about how you want to talk about your brand to sort of bring in these accelerating consumers that are coming in. And then the one other point that I wanted to highlight is from a multicultural perspective, we also saw some really big skews among Hispanic identifying individuals who are also focused on that personalization piece and what they want from brands. It plays out a little bit differently because the personalization is more about fitting with culture and sort of like respecting culture and respecting history. But again, that theme of personalization like really runs through in all those groups. So
I thought the other interesting thing with the Hispanic audience as well is they, maybe a generation ago felt a little bit like luxury was too excessive. That's changed. Like this new Hispanic, they want it, but they are still intimidated about walking into a prestige store and feeling as though you were just saying like that exclusion. And so I think it's super important for those brands to understand that there has to be a different shift in how welcoming and inclusive they are being, particularly to, Hispanic audiences. That is something that is
absolutely
definitely still a problem for them.
Yeah, and I think, it's definitely interesting in terms of the kind of shift of what you guys are saying. We've heard from exclusion to access. And it's not just about access, but it's about that key of personalization, of welcoming, and actually bringing the voice of the different consumers that are entering the market. And how are you seeing people enter the market today? Like, where are they really entering into the luxury market, especially the younger consumer, from a variety of different backgrounds? How are they coming into the luxury space?
So the Hispanic market is entering through style.
Okay.
The Gen Z market is entering through beauty. I mean, I think those make a lot of sense because there are, there's easy entry points to getting there. And Gen Z beauty has just been like all over social media for as long as they've been around. And so it's just, it's a bit of, I'm going to buy this thing, I'm going to put it on, I'm going to take a picture of it, I'm going to unbox it, I'm going to do all these things because it's not just an easy way for me to experience luxury, but it's an easy way for me to socialize and show the world who I am. So like a little bit of that's at play. We saw that the LGBTQ community is entering through food, which is really interesting. The boomer generation, very much travel.
Yeah, very heavily weighted on.
Yeah. And then just going back to Gen Z and the Hispanic community, style and beauty we said, but very, very close behind that is finance. And so all these apps that they can use to manage their wealth, like it is so critically important for them to start early and to get control of that early on in life. And so that, I don't know if we've ever, thought of that as being like a luxury product, but it certainly is very important to those groups.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because we've seen that in a lot of the other research we've done from financial service offerings being really important to women as well, because they feel like they've been left out of the conversation, left out of the advertising. So it feels like that could be a similar connection point or intersection when you hear about, luxury and kind of wealth management, financial services, of how there's an opportunity for brands, services, and companies to really find these new access points, new ways of communicating, connecting, and that's a good opportunity for people to think about.
It's also how they shop and actually purchase these things. So like when they get given an opportunity to sort of buy now, pay later, pay for a luxury product or experience in installments, like that is all playing a role in this too. So it's not just the wealth management piece of it, it's like how they're actually affording to buy these things.
Yeah, ways to pay, ways to access, ways to buy. The entire ecosystem is kind of coming together even more for consumers. Yeah, absolutely. So I think, what's one of the things, Whitney, that stands out to you as we think about this acceleration?
There's a couple of things. We had talked about it very lightly earlier, but the concept of the importance that sustainability plays in all of this. I mean, sustainability is a buzzword. We're all talking about sustainability, but especially among Gen Z and Hispanic audiences, the expectations they have for luxury brands and their involvement in the sustainability space is actually like off the charts as compared to Gen Pop. And so we know that this is, again, as we said, a buzzword. It can activate in a lot of different ways across different categories, but they're going to expect some sort of dialogue against that, and potentially it could come out in packaging, it could come out in shipping, how things are sort of put together. Also being able to highlight, how sustainability plays a role in your actual creation process of whatever products we're talking about, recycling, all of that. So those are things that, again, with some of these consumer groups that we're talking about that are really driving a lot of this acceleration, that's got to be a priority. And then the other thing was the sort of like concept of this like everyday essentials piece coming in too. So again, like how do I fit this into my day-to-day life? I want you to be able to talk about that. It's not like I'm going to go get a pair of shoes that I can only wear once a year to this like one particular thing. Like, how do I incorporate this into my everyday lifestyle is also popping amongst those groups. And then the last thing that we are going to comment on is thinking about that like experiential element. So something that we saw in particular amongst Gen Z, Hispanic, and a couple of other groups is that it's not necessarily as product focused as it potentially has been in the past. They also are thinking about experiences as luxury, so like the actual experiences themselves, and maybe going after something like that in instead of purchasing a product, but also the experience of shopping luxury. So there was some data about they were really drawn to a positive customer experience in a store or a positive online shopping experience, and that also feeling very luxurious and having an impact on how they think about the luxury brand. So kind of to your point too about, we know that sometimes when we are in the luxury space from a retail perspective, there can be an exclusionary element to it. And a lot of these groups are really responding to how can you make that customer experience process feel more positive, and that really playing a role in how they're thinking about the luxury space. I would argue, if I sort of play that out, that if they have a negative experience or if they are feeling excluded, that's really going to have an impact on their perception of that particular brand. And when they are making these decisions about how they're stepping into the space, like that, those are the kinds of things that really impact them. Whereas I think that maybe in previous generations or with different groups, it was sort of seen as like part of the game. Like, oh yeah, this is going to happen with some of these brands. I feel like a lot of that is very much so shifting. And so thinking a lot about the experience of the luxury itself, and then also luxury as an experience instead of products too.
So it's definitely the expectation has evolved in terms of the whole experience and connection. I think the other point that you made at the beginning that's important too to think about is it's not just about how you're communicating, connecting, and the experience downstream, but also the packaging, how you're carrying that forward into the messaging, that consumers are much more critical of the entire kind of like brand flow, from how your product's developed, all of the type of packaging, into how you're communicating and connecting with me and bringing it into every part of my everyday lifestyle. So I think that's really interesting that companies and brands need to think about that entire journey they're bringing people on and every little element, because people are really looking at all of it now,
and
not just the product
to your point too, like how do you communicate that? So like if you are looking at, let's say on packaging, like say you're still purchasing the actual product, but there's an indication maybe directly on the packaging that you receive, like this is made from 70% post-consumer recycled or something. So like how do you get that message out, and how do you even talk about maybe some of the earlier steps of the process too? But yeah, all of those pieces coming together. You said judgmental. Maybe it is a little judgmental, but there's an expectation that's being set, in terms of understanding the whole flow. So.
Well, it's a little chicken and egg too, because it's like we've opened up ourselves to that world by showing and pulling the curtain. Like that's so much of that was hidden before, like how the product was made, where it's made, behind the scenes of the factory, the ingredient, like people have opened themselves up to that, and now the consumer believes that they have a seat at the table to be constructive and critical, and they have a voice.
We can't be here at Cannes and not talk about Gen AI right now. So how has Gen AI and technology changed kind of access and bringing things to consumers?
We started this whole conversation saying social media is sort of the root of a lot of this, so like that's a given. I think too, there was a really interesting finding that I thought when you think about Gen Z, they really very much want a personalized experience. And a lot of that personalization is coming from AI. I think 60% of them, no, it was 80% of them, are like, I will give up my privacy and data in order to have that personalized experience. When you look at the boomer generation, they're saying full opposite. Like 80%
absolutely
of them
not.
are like,
you could not
no
have my
way.
information.
I value my privacy more than I value the personalization. So like really stark difference between those generations. But that's where we're going is that personalization factor.
Yeah, makes sense. I think, when you guys think about yourself in this space, how do you both identify with the evolving luxury space? What does it mean to you personally?
It's always so fascinating when you're working through something like this, because we put yourself in the consumer's shoes, obviously, and you're like, oh, do I think that? Like, what resonates with me? I mean, I think that I do feel like there's two things. The experience piece is something that's really resonating for me. I think that in my family, when we think about how we want to spend our time, how we want to spend our money, I do feel like an emphasis on the types of experiences that we can have is like really a driving force for us. And I think a lot of that also has to do with like where we are in the world and in time post, COVID. The way that we go to work has changed, like how much time we spend out of home, how much time we spend in the office. And so some of those maybe more physical items or like style related things that might have seemed super important 5 years ago, I think a lot of that's really shifted for me and for us. And so when we think about how we want to spend, our money and time, like, oh, let's go have this really cool experience. And then the other word I was going to use is like that uniqueness piece too, because I do feel like I'm not as invested necessarily in what everybody else has. I like to see the items that are available. Like, it's so great to be able to go on social media and not have to go look at a fashion show specifically or go look at a particular website to find out what's sort of like out and available. It's like great to be exposed to all of those types of things, but I'm not as motivated by what other people have. Like I would be almost wanting, a bag from that brand, but like in a color that nobody else has kind of thing. So that's kind of like how some of those uniqueness, personalization pieces, and then I think the experience piece is resonating for me. So
I've found that just over the years, I have not loved to have a shopping experience as much as I did when I was younger. It was like almost a part of socialization in a way. And now it's like to be able to have and to be able to buy something luxury just through an e-com channel, I find like it's easy. It's like I can see it on social media, and maybe if I'm somewhere I can like spot it in the window, but I'm more likely to sort of transact through e-commerce. And I think that is another layer of all of this, and that like democratization, that like anybody can have it. You don't just need to have this like fancy mall near you to be able to go in and have that experience. You can just do it. If you don't feel comfortable going into the store, I think that's an amazing option.
With some of the access stuff we've talked about and comfort for new people entering the market, it offers a little bit more ease of engaging with brands, shopping, and buying. How can Dotdash Meredith help brands as they're coming into the space? What are things that you guys can do for companies?
Well, I think those 5 categories that you initially said, Whitney, like the style, the beauty, travel, food and wine, finance, we have brands that are endemic in all of those categories. So like whether it's travel and leisure, the food and wine brand, in style, so we're already speaking to that audience that is totally, in these categories that are changing the game here. And I think it's the way we have always spoken to them. Like we have never come from a place of like on high, you can't come in here, like you can't have a seat here. We've always been super inclusive. We've always used diverse voices. We have always tried to make it a relatable experience. So that to me is just like, we're meeting them now we've always met them. We've been trying to meet them where they are, and now they're here. So it feels like such a nice concentric circle. So it's sort of a natural thing.
Yeah, and you have people that are coming for interest on those topics. So it's a great way to have kind of a connected audience. They tuned in for those different spaces.
And it's just the inclusion and the relatability and all of that. It's core to who we are as a brand, and it's just exactly how they want to be spoken to now.
You can give that great perspective. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so final parting word. If you want people to remember kind of one thing from what you've learned over the last year and while we're here at Cannes, what would be the one thing you want people to take away?
With one word?
No, it doesn't have to be
okay,
one word.
I was like, oh my gosh.
Yes, one word. No.
Well, no, I mean, my thought expansion and accessibility, and maybe experience, if I had to pick 3, kind of like really tying a bow on a couple of things we talked about. So
I think that a high price tag does not equate to luxury. Something we didn't say was that I think 2/3 of the people who were thinking about engaging with luxury make less than $150,000 a year. Like, it's not even, you have to be reaching this particular salary in order to have a door into this world. It's just not that way anymore. The price point is just not the factor.
And I think that's to me kind of a really interesting point of the audience is Gen Pop, what you said earlier, right? There are people that want to make small trade-ups. They want these mini moments of luxury. They want to have something that they've earned, and it doesn't necessarily have to be only only for high income individuals.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something for brands and companies to be thinking about, of how they engage in different levels, different tiers, in different ways with a broader set of consumers, which is great because there's more people to reach and engage with.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Well, thank you, ladies. Appreciate
Thank
the
you so
time
much for
today,
having us.
and
Really appreciate it.
appreciate the conversation.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks.